The most dangerous warrior is not the one who knows everything, but the one who is willing to forget it all. Kyoto, 1612. The wars had ended, and peace had settled over Japan like a heavy snowfall, quiet, pristine, and suffocating. For decades, the land had been shaped by steel and fire, by men who lived and died by instinct, chaos, and courage. Now, order ruled everything. And no one embodied that order more completely than Yamamoto Kenshin. At 63 years old, Kenshin was more legend than man. His name traveled faster than messengers, whispered with reverence in dojos, palaces, and taverns alike. 147 duels, not a single defeat. 45 years of uninterrupted discipline. His body was carved by routine, his movements refined into something beyond effort, automatic, precise, unquestionable. Every breath followed a pattern learned so long ago that it no longer required thought. To the world, Kenshin was the perfect warrior, the ultimate proof that absolute discipline could conquer uncertainty itself. But behind the flawless exterior, behind the calm eyes and measured steps, lived a truth no one dared to see, not even Kenshin himself. Discipline had not freed him. It had replaced him. Somewhere between the endless repetitions, the memorized forms, and the rigid adherence to tradition, something essential had vanished. Kenshin could execute perfection, but he could no longer feel it. His victories brought no fire, his mastery no joy. He did not move through life, he performed it. Each morning unfolded exactly like the last, identical down to the smallest gesture, as if time itself had stopped and Kenshin was trapped inside a single perfected moment, repeating forever. The younger warriors believed this was enlightenment. They bowed deeply, hoping one day to become just like him, unshaken, controlled, unbreakable. They did not realize that what they admired was not strength, but absence. Kenshin's discipline had grown so complete that it left no room for doubt, curiosity, or presence. Every situation had an answer prepared in advance. Every threat had a rehearsed response. And because of that, nothing truly touched him anymore. Peace had not revealed Kenshin's greatness, it had exposed his fragility. In war, instinct had disguised rigidity as strength. In peace, that rigidity turned inward, hollowing him out. He had spent a lifetime sharpening his sword, but never once questioned whether he was still the one holding it. The warrior's path, once alive with uncertainty and risk, had become a polished corridor with no doors, no turns, no surprises. And though Kenshin would never admit it aloud, a silent fear followed him everywhere. If discipline was taken away, there would be nothing left. This was not a story about gaining discipline, because Kenshin already possessed it beyond measure. This is a story about what happens when discipline becomes an identity, when mastery hardens into a cage, and when the very thing that once made you powerful quietly begins to erase you. The first crack appeared not in battle, but in stillness. Kenshin noticed it one evening while seated alone in his dojo, the air thick with incense and the fading warmth of sunset. His students had left hours ago, their footsteps echoing obediently into the distance, yet Kenshin remained unmoving, as he always did, posture flawless, breath regulated to the count he had followed for decades. But something was wrong. For the first time in memory, the rhythm felt forced. His breathing was correct, yet unnatural, as if the body were obeying orders rather than responding to life itself. A question surfaced, soft, unwelcome, dangerous. Why am I still doing this? Kenshin dismissed it instantly. Questions were for beginners, not masters. Doubt was a crack in the blade, a weakness to be filed away. Still, the question lingered, hovering just beyond thought, refusing to be silenced by discipline alone. That night, sleep abandoned him. His mind replayed movements he had performed millions of times, but they no longer flowed as they once had. Each form appeared detached, like watching a stranger move through familiar steps. Kenshin realized, with a sudden chill, that his body knew the path better than his mind did. He was no longer present inside his own mastery. The discipline that had once demanded total awareness now required none at all. It functioned without him. At dawn, Kenshin rose and trained harder than ever, driving his body through relentless repetition, convinced that effort would drown uncertainty. Instead, the emptiness deepened. Precision remained, but meaning dissolved. The young man attacked with enthusiasm but poor timing, an error Kenshin would normally exploit instantly. Yet for a fraction of a second, Kenshin hesitated. Not because he was slow, but because he was automatic. His response arrived too early, too clean, revealing its intention before it completed. The student, startled by his own luck, struck Kenshin lightly across the ribs. The room fell silent. The blow was harmless, but its message was devastating. Kenshin had not been defeated by the student's skill, but by his own predictability. Discipline had made him readable. The students apologized profusely, bowing low, but Kenshin felt no anger. Only clarity. His perfection had become a pattern, and patterns could be studied, anticipated, and eventually broken. What he once believed was invincibility was now exposed as repetition refined beyond adaptability. Kenshin dismissed the class early and walked alone through the streets of Kyoto, unnoticed for the first time in years. The city pulsed with life, merchants arguing, children laughing, travelers stumbling toward uncertain futures. None of it followed a form. None of it obeyed a code. And yet it moved forward with an ease Kenshin had forgotten existed. As he passed a small shrine on the outskirts of the city, he overheard an old monk speaking to a group of travelers. When the cup is full, the monk said calmly, nothing new can enter. Kenshin stopped walking. The word struck deeper than any blade. He waited, unseen, as the monk continued. The master who clings to mastery becomes its servant. True strength is not control, it is responsiveness. Kenshin felt something loosen inside him, something long held tight by fear disguised as discipline. For the first time, he did not return home to train. Instead, he sat beneath a pine tree until nightfall, watching shadows change shape without instruction, without intention. And in that quiet observation, Kenshin understood a truth that terrified him more than any enemy ever had: the discipline that built him was no longer enough to save him. Kenshin did not return to the dojo the next morning. Nor the next. The absence shocked his students more than any reprimand ever could. For years, his presence had been as constant as the rising sun, silent, inevitable, unquestionable. When word spread that the master had closed the doors without explanation, rumors ignited like dry leaves. Some whispered illness. Others feared death. Kenshin allowed the uncertainty to grow. For the first time in his life, he chose not to correct perception. Control, he had begun to realize, was the very chain he needed to break. He traveled without destination, dressed as an ordinary wanderer, carrying only a short blade and a worn journal. The roads beyond Kyoto were muddy and unforgiving, and Kenshin welcomed their resistance. Each step disrupted the careful symmetry of his former life. He slept where exhaustion took him, ate when hunger demanded, and listened more than he spoke. Slowly, the rigid timing that once governed every movement began to erode. His breathing shifted naturally with terrain and weather. His awareness widened, not sharpened by force, but softened by surrender. This was not weakness, though everything in his training screamed that it was. It was unfamiliar, and that frightened him far more than danger. Weeks into his journey, Kenshin reached a mountain village rarely marked on maps. The people there did not bow. They did not recognize him. They treated him as a man, not a legend, and the simplicity unsettled him. One evening, while sharing a meal beside a fire, an elderly woman studied him with unsettling accuracy. "You carry too much silence," she said. "And not enough listening." Kenshin nearly dismissed her words as superstition, but something stopped him. She was not impressed by his posture, his restraint, or the faint aura of violence he still carried. She saw past the discipline and into the tension beneath it. That night, she told him of a practice spoken of only in fragments, a discipline abandoned generations ago because it could not be controlled. It had no forms, no ranks, no rituals of repetition. It demanded presence so complete that identity itself dissolved under its weight. Most who try it fail, she said, feeding the fire. Not because it is difficult, but because it refuses to obey. It does not make you strong. It removes what is false. Kenshin felt a quiet resistance rise within him. Removal was loss. Loss was defeat. Everything he had been taught insisted that strength was accumulation, of skill, of discipline, of mastery. This practice promised the opposite. The woman led him at dawn to a narrow mountain path that vanished into mist. Walk until the mountain tells you to stop, she said. If you reach the summit, turn back. If you fall, do not rise immediately. Listen first. Kenshin almost laughed at the lack of instruction. No measurable goal. No criteria for success. Yet something deeper than logic compelled him forward. The climb was brutal. The path shifted constantly, rocks loose, footing unreliable. His body reached for trained responses that no longer applied. Every instinct to dominate the terrain failed. The mountain did not yield to discipline. It demanded adaptation, moment by moment. Hours passed, then days. Kenshin lost track of time. Hunger, cold, fear, and exhaustion stripped away layers of certainty. When he finally collapsed, breath ragged and mind empty, he expected panic. Instead, he felt clarity. In the silence that followed effort's collapse, awareness returned, not as control, but as alignment. He was no longer imposing himself upon the world. He was responding to it. And in that fragile, terrifying responsiveness, Kenshin glimpsed the forbidden discipline's truth. True invincibility was not the absence of weakness, but the freedom to change before weakness could take form. When Kenshin descended from the mountain, he was not the same man who had begun the climb. His movements were slower, but not from fatigue. They carried a listening quality, as if each step waited for the ground's permission before landing. The village appeared unchanged, yet everything within Kenshin had shifted. He no longer scanned for threats. He no longer anticipated outcomes. The constant inner narration, the strategic forecasting that had once defined him, had fallen silent. What remained was awareness without intention, alert but unforced. The elder woman met him at the edge of the village. She studied his eyes and nodded once. "You stopped trying to win," she said. "That is why you returned." Kenshin did not reply. Language felt clumsy now, too heavy for what he was experiencing. She led him to a small clearing surrounded by cedar trees, where the air carried a quiet pressure. "This is where the old warriors were tested," she said. "Not by strength. By pressure." She explained that the forbidden discipline was never meant to be practiced in isolation. It only revealed itself when uncertainty, risk, and consequence converged. Presence alone was not enough. It had to remain intact when fear arrived. Without warning, 3 men stepped from the trees. Their weapons were crude but real. Bandits, perhaps, or something more deliberate. Kenshin did not ask. His body reacted before thought could form, but not with the patterns of old. There was no stance, no measured breath, no preparation. The first man lunged. Kenshin shifted, not away, but into the space the attack abandoned. The motion was inefficient by every classical standard, yet perfectly aligned with the moment. The second attacker hesitated, confused by the absence of form. Kenshin felt the hesitation and moved before it solidified. There was no plan. There was no decision. Action unfolded as a consequence of awareness. When it ended, the men fled, not defeated in the traditional sense, but disrupted. Their aggression had nowhere to land. Kenshin stood still, heart pounding, surprised by the simplicity of what had occurred. There had been no effort, no struggle to dominate. Pressure had arisen, and awareness had met it without resistance. The elder woman watched silently. "You did not become stronger," she said. "You became unavailable." That word echoed inside him. Unavailable. Not rigid. Not aggressive. Not reactive. Untouchable because there was nothing to grasp. That night, Kenshin sat alone and confronted the most terrifying realization yet. Everything that had once defined him, his reputation, his flawless technique, his identity as an unbeatable master, had become unnecessary. Under pressure, those constructs slowed him. They demanded preservation. The forbidden discipline demanded surrender. To remain untouchable, he could not defend an image of himself. The moment he tried to protect who he thought he was, he would lose presence, and with it, adaptability. The next days brought deeper trials. Sleep deprivation. Conflicting instructions. Sudden confrontations. Each challenge was designed to fracture predictability. Kenshin failed often. Old habits resurfaced, especially under fatigue. Each failure was immediate and instructive. The discipline did not punish. It exposed. Whenever he reverted to control, he became vulnerable. Whenever he released it, clarity returned. Slowly, Kenshin understood why this path had been abandoned. It could not be systematized. It could not be passed down through rigid forms. It demanded continuous death of certainty. Before he left the village, the elder woman gave him no blessing, no symbol, no final teaching. Only a warning. This method will make you untouchable under pressure, she said, but it will also make you invisible to those who need hierarchy, obedience, and control. You will be misunderstood. You will be resisted. And if you ever try to turn this into doctrine, it will destroy you. Kenshin bowed, not as a master, but as a man stepping into uncertainty willingly. He knew now that returning to the world meant walking without armor. And paradoxically, that was the source of his greatest power. Kenshin's return to the city was quieter than his departure. No one announced him. No banners marked his arrival. Yet the disturbance he carried moved ahead of him like a change in weather. He walked through familiar streets, past faces that once tightened with respect or fear, and noticed something unsettling: people no longer reacted to him in predictable ways. Some bowed late. Some avoided his gaze entirely. Others watched him with curiosity rather than reverence. The structure that once organized every interaction around his reputation had loosened, and Kenshin felt exposed. Not physically, but socially. The forbidden method did not harden him against pressure, it removed his dependence on it. At the dojo, the students assembled as they always had, kneeling in perfect rows. The silence was precise, almost ceremonial. Kenshin stood before them and felt the old reflex stir, the urge to correct posture, to assert authority, to re-establish the familiar hierarchy. That impulse was pressure in its most deceptive form. Not danger, but expectation. Not threat, but identity. He allowed the urge to pass without acting on it. The room felt suddenly unstable, as if the ground beneath tradition had softened. Stand, he said, not as a command, but as an invitation. The difference was subtle, but the students sensed it immediately. They rose unevenly. Some hesitated. Others moved too quickly. Disorder entered the space, and with it, discomfort. Kenshin felt it too. His body wanted to restore symmetry. His awareness noticed the desire and let it dissolve. Today, he continued, we will not practice forms. A murmur rippled through the room. Forms were safety. Forms were certainty. Without them, there was no reference point. He paired the students randomly, ignoring rank. Move, he said simply. At first, they froze, waiting for instruction. Then they began to mimic familiar techniques, falling back on memory. Kenshin intervened only when someone stopped moving entirely. Do not perform, he told them. Respond. The distinction confused them. Several grew frustrated. One senior student finally spoke. Sensei, what is the correct response? Kenshin looked at him for a long moment before answering. If there were a correct response, he said, you would not be under pressure. The session unraveled quickly. Students clashed, misjudged distances, stumbled. Egos flared. Discipline cracked. Kenshin observed without correcting, without rescuing them from failure. This was not negligence. It was the method. Pressure without prescription. Presence without protection. By the end, the dojo looked nothing like it had that morning. The order was gone. So was the illusion of mastery. Word spread fast. Some elders accused Kenshin of abandoning tradition. Others whispered that age had weakened him. A few lords withdrew their patronage. Each reaction tested him. The forbidden discipline demanded consistency not of behavior, but of awareness. Kenshin felt the familiar pressure to defend himself, to justify his choices, to restore his standing. Each time, he noticed the impulse and released it. Untouchable did not mean immune. It meant unhooked. One evening, Tanaka approached him privately. Sensei, he said, without structure, how do we know who reduces? Kenshin answered quietly. You will know by who remains present when structure collapses. Tanaka frowned, uncomfortable. Kenshin recognized the fear. The method did not promise safety. It promised truth under pressure. That night, alone, Kenshin reflected on the paradox taking shape. In the past, pressure had demanded response, decisive, dominant, flawless. Now, pressure revealed itself as information. It showed him where attachment lived, where identity still hid. The more he let go, the less pressure could reach him. Not because he resisted it, but because there was nothing left for it to compress. And in that absence of resistance, something unexpected emerged, not weakness, but a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself. Pressure did not disappear from Kenshin's life after the transformation, it intensified. What changed was how it arrived. Before, pressure came as an external force, enemies to defeat, expectations to fulfill, forms to perfect. Now it emerged from subtler places. Silence stretched longer in conversations. Decisions lacked clear rules. Authority no longer protected him. Kenshin began to understand the final cruelty of pressure, it grows strongest when the familiar structures fall away. And yet, for the first time in decades, he did not brace himself against it. A formal summons arrived from the provincial council. Kenshin was requested, politely, but firmly, to demonstrate his method before senior masters and officials. The message carried unspoken weight. This was not curiosity. It was judgment. His teachings had disrupted hierarchy, and hierarchy always responded with pressure disguised as protocol. Kenshin accepted without hesitation. The old version of him would have prepared relentlessly, rehearsing outcomes, anticipating attacks. This time, he prepared by doing nothing at all. The hall was grand, polished, and heavy with expectation. Masters from established schools lined the perimeter, their expressions guarded. Officials sat elevated, observing. Kenshin entered alone, without ceremony. No students accompanied him. No weapons were displayed. The absence itself unsettled the room. A senior master spoke first. We hear you no longer teach discipline. The words were carefully chosen, meant to provoke defense. Kenshin felt the pull, the reflex to clarify, to correct the misunderstanding. He noticed it and let it pass. I teach discipline, he said calmly. I no longer teach attachment to it. A murmur followed. Another master challenged him openly. Then demonstrate. A student was brought forward, skilled, aggressive, eager to prove himself. Kenshin faced him without assuming a stance. The room leaned forward. Pressure condensed into a single moment. The student attacked with speed and precision, executing flawless technique. Kenshin did not counter with form. He moved as space moved. The encounter ended almost instantly. Not violently. Not dramatically. The student found himself off balance, disarmed, confused, not defeated, but dissolved. Silence followed. The officials exchanged glances. One finally asked, "What was that technique?" Kenshin answered honestly. There was none. Discomfort rippled through the hall. The answer threatened the foundation of their authority. Technique could be regulated. Presence could not. That was when Kenshin realized the deepest layer of the forbidden method. Pressure thrives on predictability. Institutions rely on it. Systems reinforce it. The moment something cannot be categorized, pressure loses its leverage. Kenshin had not resisted the system. He had stepped outside its language entirely. And from that place, no accusation could land, no expectation could bind. After the demonstration, no formal verdict was given. Kenshin was neither praised nor condemned. He was dismissed. Walking back through the city, he felt the familiar sensation of being watched, not with admiration, but uncertainty. That uncertainty was his shield. Pressure cannot target what it cannot define. In the weeks that followed, his dojo became quieter. Fewer students trained, but those who remained changed profoundly. They stopped asking how to respond and began asking whether they were present. They stopped fearing mistakes and started noticing tension. Kenshin taught them not how to win under pressure, but how to remain uncollapsed within it. When pressure arrives, he told them, do not meet it. Do not avoid it. Let it pass through an empty center. One night, sitting alone, Kenshin reflected on Musashi's unspoken truth, the reason legends spoke of him as untouchable. It was never about dominance or aggression. It was about refusing to be shaped by circumstance. Musashi had mastered the art of not needing to win. And in that refusal, he became impossible to defeat. Kenshin smiled faintly. The forbidden method was not secret because it was hidden. It was forbidden because it dismantled every structure built on fear. And fear, he now understood, was the true enemy pressure had always served. As months passed, Kenshin noticed a quiet but unsettling change within himself. The fear that once sharpened his awareness before duels, the tension that had fueled his discipline for decades, no longer appeared in the same way. At first, he worried this absence meant decline. Fear had once kept him vigilant, precise, alive. Without it, he wondered if he was growing careless. But then he realized something more unsettling and more powerful: fear had not vanished, it had lost its authority. It still arose, but it no longer dictated his actions. This realization came during an unexpected test. A former warlord, now a restless noble bored by peace, demanded a private duel. Refusal would be interpreted as weakness. Acceptance would be dangerous, both politically and physically. In the past, Kenshin would have analyzed every angle, weighed every consequence, rehearsed outcomes until sleep abandoned him. This time, he felt none of that tightening. He acknowledged the risk, accepted the uncertainty, and went to rest early. The duel took place at dawn on an empty field outside the city. There were no crowds, no ceremony, only cold air and quiet tension. The noble was younger, stronger, fueled by ego and something close to desperation. As they faced each other, Kenshin noticed the familiar attempt of pressure to take hold, the weight of reputation, the expectation to perform, the possibility of failure. Instead of resisting it, he let it exist fully. He felt the ground beneath his feet, the rhythm of his breath, the openness of the moment before action. When the duel began, it unfolded strangely. The noble attacked with force but lacked presence. His movements were aggressive yet hollow, driven by the need to prove something. Kenshin responded without urgency. He did not seek an opening, he noticed one. He did not aim to dominate, he allowed imbalance to reveal itself. The encounter ended without spectacle. The noble's sword lay in the dirt. His confidence lay there with it. Later, when asked how he had remained so calm, Kenshin struggled to answer. Calmness suggested effort, control, suppression. What he felt was none of those. He had simply not added resistance to the moment. Pressure, he realized, feeds on internal conflict, the clash between what is happening and what one believes should happen. Remove that conflict, and pressure collapses under its own weight. This insight became central to his teaching. Kenshin began guiding his students not toward confidence, but toward neutrality. Confidence still depended on outcomes. Neutrality did not. He taught them to notice the moment when the mind tried to seize control, to label, to predict, to protect. That moment, he explained, was where pressure entered. If they could remain present just before that grasping, they would discover a stillness that no external force could penetrate. Some students left, frustrated. They wanted techniques, formulas, guarantees. Others stayed, drawn to something they could not fully articulate. Those who stayed began to move differently, not only in combat, but in life. They spoke less. They reacted more slowly. They listened more deeply. Under stress, they did not harden. They softened, and in that softness they became impossible to overwhelm. Kenshin understood now why this path was rare. It required surrender without collapse, discipline without rigidity, strength without aggression. It demanded the courage to stand undefended in the face of uncertainty. But for those willing to walk it, pressure ceased to be an enemy. It became a signal, a reminder to return to presence. And in that return, they found something far more powerful than control, freedom. As Kenshin's understanding deepened, he began to see how deeply pressure shaped not just warriors, but entire lives. He noticed it in merchants desperate to protect status, in officials clinging to rank, in students obsessed with approval. Everyone was fighting an invisible battle against imagined futures, rehearsing losses that had not yet occurred. Kenshin realized this was the true battlefield, the mind's refusal to remain with what is. And it was here that most people were defeated long before any external struggle began. One evening, Kenshin gathered his remaining students and spoke with unusual directness. He told them that pressure was not created by danger, but by attachment. Attachment to winning. Attachment to identity. Attachment to the image of who they believed they were supposed to be. When those attachments were threatened, the body tightened, the breath shortened, and the mind fractured into fear and control. He explained that the goal was not to eliminate these reactions, but to see them clearly without obeying them. To demonstrate, Kenshin introduced an exercise that shocked his students. He asked them to stand in the center of the dojo while the others shouted criticisms, insults, and doubts, words meant to trigger shame, anger, and defensiveness. At first, the students stiffened. Their jaws clenched. Their fists tightened. Then Kenshin instructed them to do nothing. Not to argue. Not to suppress. Simply to feel the sensations as they arose and passed. Over time, something unexpected happened. The words lost weight. The pressure dissolved. What remained was awareness, steady, unmoved, untouched. This, Kenshin told them, was the essence of becoming untouchable. Not building thicker armor, but realizing armor was unnecessary. The mind, when seen clearly, could not harm itself. Thoughts came and went like weather. Emotions surged and faded like tides. Only the one who believed they had to control these movements suffered under their weight. Kenshin saw the same principle apply in combat. A warrior who tried to dominate the moment became rigid. A warrior who surrendered awareness to fear became reckless. But one who remained present, unattached to outcome, moved freely within chaos. This freedom was not passive. It was alert, responsive, alive. Under pressure, it did not collapse or harden. It adapted. Word of Kenshin's teaching spread quietly, often misunderstood. Some claimed he had abandoned discipline entirely. Others accused him of undermining tradition. Kenshin did not defend himself. Defense, he had learned, was another form of attachment. He simply continued teaching those who were ready. For the students who stayed, something profound shifted. They no longer measured progress by victories or praise. They began to notice the subtler signs, how quickly they returned to calm after stress, how clearly they could think when challenged, how little they needed external validation. Pressure no longer defined them. It revealed them. Kenshin understood now that true resilience was not the absence of disturbance, but the ability to remain present within it. This was the forbidden method, not because it was dangerous, but because it threatened every system built on control. It could not be commodified, standardized, or guaranteed. It required direct experience, moment by moment. And once seen, it could never be unseen. The warrior who grasped this did not become fearless. He became free. As the seasons turned, Kenshin's reputation transformed in an unexpected way. He was no longer spoken of as the most disciplined master in Japan, but as the most unsettling one. Those who encountered him left with a strange impression, not of power asserted, but of power withheld. Kenshin no longer dominated rooms with presence, instead, the room seemed to organize itself around him. Silence followed him naturally, not from fear, but from an unspoken attentiveness his calm created in others. One afternoon, a delegation of officials visited his dojo, seeking advice on training guards for the shogunate. They spoke of efficiency, predictability, and obedience under pressure. Kenshin listened carefully, then asked a single question: what happens when the unexpected occurs? The officials answered with doctrine and contingency plans. Kenshin nodded, then demonstrated. He asked one guard to attack him using approved techniques. Kenshin responded effortlessly. Then he asked the guard to act unpredictably, without plan or structure. The guard hesitated, confused. In that hesitation, Kenshin gently disarmed him. The lesson was clear. Systems function until reality deviates. Under true pressure, rigid preparation collapses. Only presence adapts. The officials left unsettled, uncertain how to categorize what they had seen. Kenshin understood their discomfort. His teaching offered no guarantees. It could not be enforced. It demanded inner responsibility. For Kenshin, this clarity brought a quiet sense of completion. He no longer sought to change the world or convince others. His work was simple: remain present, teach those who asked sincerely, and let outcomes unfold naturally. In relinquishing control, he had discovered an unshakable stability. Praise no longer inflated him. Criticism no longer threatened him. Victory and loss held equal weight. Each moment stood on its own, complete. Students who trained under Kenshin began to carry this presence into their lives beyond the dojo. They handled conflict with less reactivity. They faced failure without collapse. Under pressure, they did not rush to defend identity or image. They paused. In that pause, they found choice. Kenshin saw now why this method remained forbidden. It undermined authority built on fear. It freed individuals from external validation. A warrior who could not be pressured could not be easily controlled. Such a person obeyed only reality itself. In his final years, Kenshin spent more time walking alone, observing the world without commentary. Birds, wind, footsteps, each moment arrived without demand. He realized that what he had been seeking all his life was not mastery over chaos, but intimacy with it. The chaos he had feared was simply life unfiltered. When younger warriors asked him for secrets, he offered none. He told them the truth was not hidden, only overlooked. Pressure existed only where resistance existed. Remove resistance, and pressure dissolved. What remained was awareness, silent, alert, and impossibly resilient. Kenshin's legacy was not a style, a school, or a doctrine. It was an invitation. To stop fighting the moment. To stop preparing for life and start meeting it directly. Those who accepted this invitation did not become invincible. They became untouchable. In the final years of his life, Kenshin no longer measured time by seasons or achievements, but by moments of clarity. He understood now that the path he had walked was never about becoming stronger than others, but about removing everything that was false within himself. What remained was not a perfected warrior, but a human being fully present with life as it unfolded. This presence did not announce itself. It did not seek recognition. Yet it carried a quiet authority that could not be challenged. Kenshin often reflected on the paradox that defined his journey. Discipline had been necessary. Without it, he would never have developed the strength to face dissolution. Yet discipline alone had nearly destroyed him. Only when he stopped clinging to it did it become useful again. It transformed from a prison into a tool, something he could pick up or set down as the moment required. This was the essence of the forbidden method, not abandoning discipline, but no longer being owned by it. When Kenshin eventually passed, there were no grand ceremonies, no declarations from the shogunate, no monuments raised in his honor. His dojo remained small, quiet, and easily overlooked. But those who trained there carried something that could not be erased. Under pressure, they did not fracture. They did not freeze or overreact. They returned to presence. And from that presence, they acted with clarity. Years later, stories spread of warriors who survived impossible odds, not through superior technique, but through an uncanny calm in moments of chaos. They did not panic. They did not hesitate. They responded. Observers called it instinct, luck, or genius. Those who knew Kenshin's teachings understood otherwise. It was the absence of internal resistance that made such responsiveness possible. The forbidden nature of this method was not its danger, but its simplicity. It could not be sold as a system. It could not be mastered through repetition alone. It demanded honesty, surrender, and the courage to face uncertainty without armor. Most people preferred control. Very few were willing to become undefended. And yet, this teaching endured, quietly passing from person to person, era to era. It surfaced whenever someone realized that pressure was not an enemy to be defeated, but a signal pointing back to presence. It appeared in moments of collapse, when familiar strategies failed and something deeper was required. The truth Kenshin left behind was unsettling and liberating. You do not become untouchable by hardening yourself against the world. You become untouchable by no longer needing the world to be a certain way. When there is nothing to protect, nothing can be threatened. When there is nothing to prove, pressure has no leverage. This is why the most dangerous warrior is not the one who knows everything, but the one willing to forget it all. In that forgetting, presence emerges. And in presence, there is a strength that no force can break.